session for the Utah County Commission. This is a new practice we've instituted for this year. Every other Wednesday, we'll be holding a work session in the afternoon to discuss upcoming legislative items and have a more open dialogue and hopefully improve the transparency and the conversation in many of the policy decisions we make as a legislative body. On today's agenda, we have 12 items that have been submitted for discussion on our work session. We'll go ahead and start with with work session item number 1, and this is a subdivision plat A for the Jousey subdivision. We'll go ahead and look to staff to give us a briefing on this.
Good morning, Commissioner, or afternoon, sorry. I guess I'm the sacrificial lamb today since I'm the first one to go through this. So normally we would put most of these items on consent agenda. I just wanted to make sure that we made you aware of kind of the subdivisions that were coming forward. Just happens that we had 5 of them that kind of came up at the same time. So Greg Robinson with Community Development, the Jousey Plat A, subdivision Plat A, is a 1-lot subdivision for a 5.25 acre parcel, roughly. There is one item about this subdivision that is a little bit unique, that there is part of it that is in the floodplain. To that, there is a note on the plat that kind of designates that and also specifies some requirements if they build in the floodplain. So other than that, it's a pretty straightforward subdivision. There's nothing really out of the ordinary from this than any other subdivision that we normally do. Any questions or comments?
Any have any? Okay, or maybe go ahead and move on to the next one then, the CJC Arabian Farm subdivision.
This is similar. There isn't a lot of there isn't much that is concerning about this. Is a straightforward subdivision. Also a 5.25 acre, actually a little more than 5.25 acre parcel in the RA5 zone. Has frontage on 9900 South in the Benjamin area.
Questions? I don't see any questions. We can go ahead and move to number 3, which is the Hunter subdivision.
Can I just ask? So in all of these, this is simply we've got to approve it because we approved the subdivision, but these are clearly within the rights of the property owners, and you don't see any issues with it.
Yes, these are typically administrative processes that we would normally just have on the consent agenda. We and probably would appreciate some direction from you is if you would continue to would like to see these on the work sessions to see these subdivision come through, or if it'd be better policy to kind of keep them on the consent agenda going forward.
As it is. Maybe turn the one off to your right, Bill. Sometimes that helps.
Is it on? Nope. All set over here then. So for me on these, I don't mind either way, but as long as, usually they're the ones that have followed the process and that, according to what we've set up already previously, if they're in accordance with them, they're pretty easy. It's a pretty easy check off because it's like checking the box, and all we're really saying is the boxes have been checked, they've been verified, so therefore they can go ahead, and that's how I usually have viewed these.
Yeah, that's very true. They have a process that they go through, and we unless they meet all the requirements, we don't bring these to the commission to get approved. So unless if there are issues, we wouldn't bring them to the commission meeting. So yeah, it's kind of that is the case.
And for me on these, like for this type of a meeting where they're, as Commissioner Lee echoed it, not one way or the other, but I actually would probably be fine without them in this session, unless there is a specific item within the approval that we might need to discuss, right?
Yeah,
That
no.
if there's some type of variance or change or, extraordinary circumstance that makes this particular one a little unique, in those instances, I think they'd be great for this meeting, because then we can discuss those.
Right.
Any of those variances or unique situations that might arise with one of these, like the Robert Stevens ones come to mind, right? Where we're trying to deal with some road issues, or somebody wants a private road, or, a roundabout, or some type of improvement issue that we need to work through, then I think it would make a ton of sense for them to come here. But if they're routine, no worries at all on anything, then I don't,
Yeah, and I think that would, is kind of the direction that we would probably love to
We-
go as well.
We would actually, if we voted against these, there would be a claim for a taking, and that would be hard for us to go down that path.
Right, exactly. Once they do, the state code is pretty clear about what, if they do meet the requirements, and then they should be approved. So you're correct.
So I tend to hear or agree with Commissioner Lee and Commissioner Ivy on that. I just am kind of curious, as a follow-up to what Commissioner Ivy said, is there a way that you could clearly describe, how would you delineate that standard that they just indicated?
So
Because then we can be on the same page of what, he's kind of saying abnormal, but what is the right language to describe those subdivisions that would come into a meeting like this?
if there are conditions, I think that it'd probably be difficult for us to make that judgment. I think that more than likely, we would probably try and put it, those issues in our staff report, as well as probably communicate with the commission as far as whether or not they should probably have further discussion. And if there is further discussion, I think that could be done either in the regular meeting, or also hold off and put onto a work session if there are items that come up regarding that.
Because one of those check boxes would have to be left blank or questioned.
no
And
question.
that's where it would definitely need to probably come here first.
This is Bryce Armstrong with staff. Just echoing Greg's comments, there will be a few subdivision applications that by ordinance requires a commission approval for some sort of exception. Think back to Backcountry Estates.
Right.
They were asking for an irrigation exception, and so those might be ones that we could bring in this setting and have that discussion. I guess our default position would be to put them on, if they seem clear to us, put them on regular session, and then there's always an opportunity to still discuss at regular sessions.
Does that kind of answer your question, Tanner?
Yeah, it does. I just, as this is new, I really appreciate you guys doing this in this work session. And maybe, Bryce, I would still just love to get, and like Greg said, a heads up, I think is helpful, because sometimes it's hard just looking at the agenda item to know whether there's an issue or not. So if we can just figure out a good process for communicating, hey, these meet all the check boxes, like Commissioner Lee's saying, and we get those on the normal agenda. Let's just somehow, and maybe there's just a little bit of follow-up that you guys can communicate with us, so we know which ones are unique that we hold off into a work session like this, which sounds like it's going to be the vast minority of them.
Okay, we will.
Okay, perfect. We'll let you off the hook on the rest of them then.
Great, thank you.
All right, that will bring us to, I believe, Richard, right? This is this is item number 6 in our work session agenda. It's about adopting a resolution authorizing the commission chair to sign an interlocal agreement with Saratoga Springs for the extension of the Pony Express Parkway Phase 2.
This is like some of the others you've seen with the MAG funding process. There are several projects that are funded through the county sales tax dollars. Each of those projects need to come before the commission with an interlocal agreement. This is one of those interlocal agreements. This one thing that is a little bit maybe out of the ordinary with it, they are in the 2021 funding year. The Saratoga Springs is wanting to start on the work. They just want to make sure they have the agreement in place, so they do get reimbursed when the time comes and the funding is available. So this is a little bit ahead of when you would normally see that. But other than that, it's just one of the normal funding agreements. It's our standard form that we use on those, so. I don't know if you have any questions on this one particularly, or?
I've got a couple questions on these two. This one's for 3,618,135, and the next one's for 2 million. I mean, they're similar in the sense they're trying to do things before 2021
Right.
when that funding comes in. And it has on the line item as an expense, and so my confusion comes in that I'm assuming that Saratoga Springs and then the other project was Springville Cities, that they're footing that bill, but it has our accounts tied to it.
Right, that's
And-
where we pay the money out of, and that's the 2218 or the third quarter sent monies. That's the account number that's on there.
But we wouldn't be paying that until 2021.
Correct.
Okay, that makes sense. When I saw that in there, I was wondering who was fronting that money.
Yeah, these are both reimbursement agreements, so the city actually has to expend the funds and then turn in a request to the county for reimbursement. Then that goes through our process to review that, it goes to the auditor's office and then for payment from there.
So the other thing is I looked down through through the interlocal agreement on it and knowing kind of the MAG process with it, there is a potential into the future if we're expending funds that we haven't even collected yet, in which there's safety nets that are built into the MAG process where it says that if we don't collect that money, that these projects can be put on hold.
Correct.
And so it gives me a little pause to think that we're spending, well, we're not spending money. They're
Right.
spending money. So are you comfortable then with them, are they comfortable with signing an interlocal agreement that says they're gonna spend money, but they may not get fully reimbursed? And does this contract kind of reflect that?
I honestly don't know if there's a section in here that would contemplate that or not. I'd have to go through and, let's see.
Commissioner Lee, I had the exact same line of questioning, so I'm glad you're asking that. Because, Richard, when I looked at this, it kind of seemed more like the standard agreement,
It is
that
the
we would
standard
do.
agreement, so.
but not the early reimbursement standard, but just the normal how we would fund the project. And I would expect, if I were a city, I understand that this is a way to, basically take on some of the risk, and you want the project done earlier, so you use some city funds. But if they're going to make the decision to do that, then I think the contract should absolutely reflect Commissioner Lee's point that it doesn't change any of the risk or the timing mechanisms on the county funds. They're taking all of the risk until the money kind of finally comes through and is approved through the MAG process. And if basically the county and MAG are treated the same, then great.
Yes.
They're deciding to spend it early.
That is correct. They are treated the same whether it's a county-funded project or a MAG-funded. Section 8C on page 5, down at the bottom of the page is funding availability. It talks about that they will not be reimbursed until the funds are available, either to MAG or to the county, whichever is the appropriate entity at that point. And that the reimbursement will be made upon receipt of that funding to the county or to UDOT through the MAG money that gets paid there, because that is state money that's paid out through the MAG side of this agreement. So even though they are setting this up so they can do the work ahead of time, it's so that they have a comfort level that when the funding is available, they will be reimbursed, but that there's not a guarantee that fund, if the funding goes away for some reason, or we just simply don't collect the amount of funds that are anticipated, then those funds get reduced.
Okay, and I mean, I would just maybe make sure that's clear through the whole
Okay, and I'll touch base with the
interlocal agreement.
attorney's office, make sure that we're good on that, and we've got the language in here that needs to be to satisfy that, so.
I just don't want the interlocal agreement to be assumed that money was coming,
That it's
no
guaranteed.
matter what,
Yep.
there's a
I would
guarantee
agree.
there. That's not our risk that
Yes.
we'd
Right.
like to take.
Do you mind if I make a comment too? The other thing that I
Please.
would probably recommend is that the funding source be specifically defined in the contract. As far as I can see right now, the only thing it talks about is the county transportation sales tax funds. The county receives several different transportation sales tax funds, at least 3 that I know of. And so I think it would help to clearly delineate which sales tax funds we're talking about, and that the city has responsibility for making sure they're compliant with any rules or guidance regarding the
And
spending
I know
of those
when
funds.
this standard form agreement was put together, that was actually talked about at that point, but because there are the different funds and to give the flexibility of where those funds could be moved around if need be, there's some that have more restrictions like the corridor monies and things like that, that those, it gave the flexibility to not have it clearly laid out as that this is in this fund or that fund, and to have a standard agreement. That was what we looked at a couple of years ago when these standard agreements were written. We could certainly address that and look at that as well.
Yeah, because I think just going along with the discussion, if there happened, I think that this is talking about the third quarter cent, the assumption that it's coming from. But if that funding source wasn't available and that's not clearly delineated, would the county then be online for using the fourth quarter cent sales tax?
I don't think so because of how the MAG approval is done and the delineation that's done on the MAG side of it that says, okay, this is paid from third quarter, fourth quarter, quarter preservation, that sort of thing. They delineate all of that on the spreadsheet that the commission approves prior to these agreements.
So then it probably could be more specific in the contract.
It could be, so.
Okay, I just take a peek at that and make sure that that's,
We can do that.
we're covered on it. I mean, I don't have a problem with them expending their money and having an interlocal agreement with them. They're taking all the risk with it, but
Yep. And then any questions on the Springbone? It's a similar situation.
Kind of the same, I think.
Yep. And maybe just a question on interlocal agreements in general. Is that something that you'd like to see on a regular basis on the work session, or what's your thoughts on those? I'm anticipating they would be a standard review here at a work session. Is that a good assumption?
I would think so.
Okay.
Perfect. Thank you, Richard. All right, we'll go ahead and now move to work session item number 8. This is related to a proposed ordinance change on the county map from residential agriculture to the mining and grazing zone for 186 acres. Bryce.
Bryce Armstrong, Community Development. As Commissioner Ivy stated, this is an application for a zone map amendment. This was submitted by an applicant, JDH Fairfield LLC, who has an interest in some property out in the western reaches of the county, west of Fairfield, just off of Highway 73. The parcel is currently 300 plus acres, and it's about half, a little more than half is in the RA5 zone, and the remainder is in the mining and grazing zone. Should be some maps that have been included in your agenda backup. Kind of a simple request. The applicant has desires to utilize the property, I believe, for mining type uses, which are not allowed in the RA5 zone. And if you recall, last year we went through a text amendment that kind of delineated the rules related to a parcel that's divided by 2 zones, and we had some minimum thresholds. This would exceed that, so the most restrictive zoning would be held in effect, which would be the RA5 zone, which does not allow mining and grazing. So that's what has necessitated this request by the applicant. Staff has looked at the application and feels that this is probably the most appropriate zoning designation as it relates to the area. The general plan designates this area as an agricultural / watershed designation, which is includes both the mining and grazing and the RA5 zone. And so that does not require a general plan amendment. Again, this is something that, in looking at the history of this, Fairfield, most of Fairfield was also zoned RA5 prior to its incorporation 10, 15 years ago. And I think this is just a remnant island that was left after that incorporation. That's why we have that RA5 out there. There seems to be no irrigated agricultural use out there, which is kind of consistent with the purpose of the RA5 zone. This property is adjacent to Fairfield City or town, but it is not within its annexation policy declaration. We did send a notification to Fairfield City. So that's just kind of the basics.
So a question, you didn't address the, I read in there was a division
Yes.
and that it lacked going through that correct process.
Yeah.
So could you address that a little bit too, and some of the concerns that go with it? I'm assuming there's some concerns that have happened, and it seems like there was hesitancy to move forward with it until some of this gets clarified. Is that what's
Well,
going
you're
on?
right. There is an issue related to the parcel. So when this was submitted, the applicant went through a zone clearance to see what the status was and found out it was bisected by the zoning, and so they submitted this application. Subsequent to that, I don't know if the applicant is here. Oh, he can kind of speak to that. I think unknowingly deeded the property to reflect ownership, not aware of the subdivision requirements to deed property or divide property. And so that problem exists whether or not the zone change, the zone map amendment goes forward. That's kind of a separate issue. We brought it up, pointing that out at the Planning Commission meeting, just to make the applicant aware that even though our recommendation this would still be the same, that issue would need to be addressed prior to any permits being issued on the property, whether it stayed in its current zoning designation or was changed to the mining and grazing. And from what I understand, the
But
applicant,
we could go ahead and
yes,
and change the zone on it, but any permits for the use would be subject to the changes that would be needed and necessary on that
yes,
division.
correct. And I think the applicants indicated they're gonna probably work with the owner and get that recombined. That's probably the simplest, because subdivision would involve adding roads. They don't have direct access frontage on a road, and I don't think they have any residential desires. They want to use it for mining, so that would be something that would be administrative before they.
It wouldn't
No.
change us doing anything. I mean, it'd just go back to them doing that,
Yes.
going through that process.
Yeah, so
Okay.
we could probably.
I thought, when I was reading down through it, I was thinking that maybe it would hold up the change of the zoning. You know, that's how I kind of read it as I was reading it.
Yeah, it probably wasn't as clear as it could have been, but no, we still would have a mechanism to make sure that's verified before we issued a permit. And so, I should note, this was subject to a public hearing as required by state law. It was held at the Planning Commission in December, and the Planning Commission recommended approval. So, yeah, I do believe the applicant is here. He can kind of answer any other additional questions if you have any.
But those were my questions.
You have any, would you like to speak? I don't know that we have any additional questions for you, but.
Just real quick, Jason Rickards for JDH Fairfield, and exactly, as he said, the plan is to recombine those. What happened is we are purchasing in kind of a takedown situation, and we didn't recognize that by doing a meets and bounds, it was going to throw off all the permits, so we're just gonna go ahead and reconstruct that contract in a different way so that we're not in any violation of the rules. So it should be easy enough to redo, and we appreciate you guys considering it, so thank you.
Perfect, thank you.
You know, I just had a thought though. If the zoning changes and then is the reconstruction gonna happen before the zoning change? Or would you do it after?
In terms of the contract, you mean with underlying?
The zoning change, will it cause problems to go in a different direction? Or do you want everything to be in that mining and grazing?
We do want everything to
Oh,
be in the
okay,
mining and
so
grazing. Yeah, we actually,
guess
that's
that
what we
doesn't matter
applied
then.
for. Yeah,
Okay.
so we want it that way, and the reason is, the part that we're planning on mining isn't actually in the RA5, but just the whole parcel has to be one unified zone. So we're here to just make sure we're in compliance, that's all.
Perfect, thank you.
If there's no.
What will be the mining use here?
The mining use there will probably be just an aggregate pit for some of the different projects that are happening out in that area. This is a great spot to be. It's not through any residential subdivisions and all that, and it's able to, for us to be, part of and help with all the construction of all the infrastructure that's going to be happening out in an area. And it's not going through some of the residential areas where some of the other aggregate pits that are in that area require a lot of, coming into contact with the general public, which is what we're trying to avoid with those kind of operations.
Thank you.
Okay.
So just as a follow-up to that, this is Bryce again. Assuming the zone map change is approved, then the applicant would be subject to the mining and grazing zoning and would have to go through the permitting process for that mining operation, meeting the ordinance that we have in effect. So we would work with them through that once that zoning's in place. The other item or question I had is, and I believe this may have been discussed in department head, but as I understand, this would then automatically move forward to the next available commission agenda,
Correct.
and that's nothing that would be happen
Next
independent of
week.
staff doing that.
I think, that's a good question. I think I think it will be available to be on there, and then the commissioner just needs to check off on it.
I just didn't know
It's
if we
like
need to
our
make
normal process.
a new request.
And Ezra
So,
or Tanner, would you like to
I-
clarify?
I just got a note from, my understanding, and anyone in the room can speak up, is that at the end of this meeting, we can make a motion. We could do it one by one, but there's no need. At the end, like so far, I think everything, we would just like it to be on consent agenda,
We could do that. too.
right? So if the meeting had ended right now, we could say, just move that items 1 through 9 are continued on consent for the next meeting's agenda. And that way it will happen automatically and no one needs to resubmit their agenda items.
Okay.
Okay, great. One note on this item. I identified it as a work session discussion item, so the language would need to be changed to approve or deny the ordinance. And I can kind of work with.
Yep.
Okay.
The only question I have on that, and that would be a Dave question. Work sessions, we don't make any decisions. Is that a decision or is that not a decision? Is that? I think just moving it to the agenda. Is not? Okay. All right.
We'll go to number 9. This is to approve and authorize an ICA with Pleasant Grove City for substance misuse prevention and communities that care prevention model. Heather.
Heather Lewis with the Utah County Department of Drug and Alcohol Prevention and Treatment. And I'm not sure, I think there was a question about whether or not there was enough funding in the budget line to do this, and we've moved it. So there was money there, it just wasn't in the right place. So I think that's taken care of.
So that, and I'm glad you brought that up. 40,000.
24. It was 24,000 was needed, and there was only 20,000 in the line. So we just needed an extra 4,000 moved over.
I thought in the contract it said 40,000, and then there was 20,000 in there. The state is coming in with 10,000, and you were moving 4. I'm really confused at the.
So the state
numbers.
will give us 10,000 for every new coalition that starts for the first 3 years. So
Okay.
they're going to give us $10,000 plus I had the funding already in my budget to pay for this coalition. So, really, we don't even necessarily need to worry about the 10,000 until the Division of Substance Abuse and Mental Health gives it to us, and then we could use that next year in the budget or whatever. We haven't seen that yet from them. They promised us, but we haven't been given those funds yet.
Okay. So the number's 24,
Yes.
the 40. I was trying to get to the 40.
Yeah. No, it's
And I
just
had
24.
20 and 10 and 4, and I was like, we're 6.
It doesn't add. It does. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. That was the only question I had on it.
You knew that
So-
was the question.
I have a question on this one is, how do we think about, you mentioned there's funding for this, but are we willing to enter into these? I don't know how we budget for this where we're supporting the city of Pleasant Grove. I'm not sure exactly how many cities go to this, or enter into a community that care.
We
How do you kind of deal with parity between the cities on this issue?
Well, the cities all provide a match as well. So part of the funding that we get from the Division of Substance Abuse and Mental Health is targeted for capacity building in the county for these coalitions. So currently we have 5 communities that care model coalitions. This is the newest one. So the 24,000 that the county dollars provide, then the city also will be matching with another 10,000. to pay for the position, to pay for whatever activities, training, whatever other needs are necessary. But based on each city, we enter into the same agreement. I give our portion is anywhere from 16 to 20,000. This time 24 because they're brand new, and so but each year it's 16 to 20,000 depending on what the division budget looks like for me. And then the city provides a $10,000 match, and that's just how all of the cities work. Does that
So
make
it's a pretty standard deal.
Yes,
So it's kind of a
yes.
standing offer for any of them who wants to enter into it. And if they do enter into it, it's going to be the same deal for each city.
Yep, yes.
And Heather, correct me if I'm wrong, but if my recollection serves me right, we really initially with these targeted a lot of the cities that were higher use areas,
Yes,
right?
absolutely.
So we've
Yep.
tried to identify through data
Based
that
on
the
data,
cities
exactly.
in the
Mhm.
county that have had the highest substance abuse rate and tried to push to get those cities on board, and now fortunately seeing the success in areas like Spanish Fork and Salem, a lot of these other cities are wanting to come on board as a result.
That's
Would
correct.
that be accurate?
Yes. Any other questions?
Don't see any. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll go ahead and move to work session agenda item number 10. This is to look at approving and authorize the signing of the written certificate of Utah County RE for $65 million on the bonds. We have someone here. Dave, are you?
I can address that, yes. This deals with the bus rapid transit bonding that occurred back in 2016. As a part of the requirements associated with that bonding, we are required to submit this certificate to confirm the completion of the project. Part of that is so that any remaining funds in the construction fund can be transferred to the bond fund. My understanding is that there are no remaining funds, so this will be somewhat of a hollow certification, but still it's a certification required to be made.
Okay.
We are relying on the certificate of UDOT, which we've obtained, and there is a punch list which is attached to that certificate indicating those punch list items that still remain related to the project.
So I just had a question because it looks like we're supposed to sign this, and I'm not aware of, it seems like there's some real stuff here. You know, if you look at item number 2, we've been informed that there exists a claim by contractor against UTA and the project relating to extended overhead costs.
Correct.
So I am not aware of that, so I didn't really want to sign that until I understood what was happening.
Those are identified in the certificate that's attached as Exhibit A to the document, which is the certificate from UDOT. And let me find that.
Well,
Yeah.
the certificate just says the same thing.
Correct. And I don't have
Which
more detail.
It doesn't describe what is actually happening.
That's all the detail that I'm aware of. We could request more detail from UTA if you would like.
So I guess I'm not entirely sure how this affects us, but it sounds like someone's reserving claims or making reference to claims. And so I wouldn't normally want to allow that to happen unless we agreed and we're aware of such claims.
And
So
that's why the certificate mentions that exception, so that it's clear that anyone who relies on the certificate is made aware that those claims exist and have been disclosed in the document that we're signing.
Okay. So it's unclear whether this affects, I still don't understand whether this affects us or not, but if your opinion is that it could, then I want to know, I would like to have more detail on exactly what the claims are.
I can request that UTA provide us with that additional detail.
And just so it says, when it says claims against UTA and or the project, so would that ever attach any liability to us as a county?
It should not, and if there were any, then UTA would have an obligation to defend and indemnify us. My recollection, that's contained within the interlocal agreement that was signed with UTA. We would have protection there.
All right. Then maybe I'll just hold this one and would love to get some of that more info. Thank you.
And if that's the case, then perhaps I'd suggest that we not put that on the next week's agenda until, I'll put it back on once we get that detail for UTA.
Okay. Sounds great. All right, we'll go ahead and move on to, I keep wanting to say regular agenda, work agenda, item number 11, which is to reconsider policy prohibiting DDAP from billing commercial health insurance plans. Richard Nance.
Richard Nance, Department of Drug and Alcohol Prevention and Treatment. This is kind of revisiting a discussion we had at the last Local Substance Abuse Authority Board meeting, where we made the request of the local authority board to kind of depart from the historical policy. It's not a written policy, it's just an informal philosophical policy that we had in place, that we don't compete with the private sector for clients for drug and alcohol treatment. And though historically the way we've made that determination whether we compete or not is whether we try to get on commercial health insurance panels as a provider for people who have health insurance through their employer, for instance. So most of those folks go to private providers, and we've been the social safety net program. One of the issues that's come up for us is with Medicaid expansion now and some reductions in state general fund dollars. When you look at our revenue budget for 2020, we have a gap there that we need to try to backfill, and rather than dip into reserves, we want to look at other potential sources of revenue to do that. When we have people who are eligible for Medicaid under the expansion up to 138% of poverty, those folks are also on an accountable care organization plan. So you've approved all the contracts for those, and there are 4 of those. So they're University of Utah Health Plans, Select Health, Steward, and Molina. And all 4 of the, well, I'm not sure about Steward, but at least the other 3 have Affordable Care Act health insurance exchange plans that they offer. When we have someone who we start on Medicaid at eligibility level of 138% of poverty, one of our first treatment plan goals for them is to get them a job. So typically within 2 or 3 months after they begin treatment with us, we get them employed, and they no longer are eligible for Medicaid, even at 138% of poverty. So at that time, we've been trying to get them enrolled on exchange plans because they are offered on a sliding fee scale, so they're subsidized. So for someone who might apply for a silver plan, depending on their income and family size, it might cost them no more than about $20 a month to get on one of the exchange health insurance plans. So what we asked at the last authority board meeting was whether or not we could sign on to become panel providers for the exchange plans. And Commissioner Ainge said, why don't you try to bill a few of them first and see what your experience is. So there were 2 attachments to this agenda item. One was a spreadsheet that has some information about exchange plans on it. And the most important part of the information related to what Commissioner Ainge asked was out of the last 5 columns, the first 3, and they all say out of network benefit not covered. So we didn't bill any of these because based on what we learned doing our research, we wouldn't have gotten paid anything anyway. One of the clinical pieces of that makes this important is if we have someone that we started in treatment and they're with us 2 or 3 months, and then we need to try to, when they become no longer eligible for Medicaid expansion, we put them on an exchange plan. We can't provide treatment services for them any longer, and we'd have to transfer them to another provider. So that's kind of disruptive to the continuity of the care. And typically when you do that kind of transfer, the follow-through is around 50%. So we would kind of lose the investment of the first 2 or 3 months of treatment, where 6 to 9 months is a typical effective length of stay in treatment. So what we wanted to do was talk to you about letting us again, since we already have these contracts in place with the 4 ACOs, where they've included language for us to bill their commercial plans and provided us rates that are more attractive than the Medicaid rates. We'd like to be able to, just for those, through those 4 ACO contracts, be able to bill commercial insurance for those clients that we already have in treatment that have been on Medicaid. So that's the request.
Would they be out of network? Would we still have the same problem, or that?
No, those 4, we're already in their network.
Are in the network?
Right. So any of the others, we would try to direct clients to continue with their current ACO plan under their exchange program. So it would be something that our case managers would coordinate with the ACO care managers to do that application.
So where was in the past, and if this wasn't a written policy or anything, not to compete with the public sector, I mean, where do you see that competition? If you go forward with this, where does that happen? Where you see that there would be some potential competition with the private sector?
Well, it would be just as it always has been. So this policy was kind of put in place. It's more of a philosophy than a formal policy.
Yeah, I would say philosophy.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, it's kind of like the convention center shouldn't compete, with bridal places for hosting weddings or something, right? That's not necessarily a written rule. You could still do it there, but we're trying to avoid the government competing with the private sector.
Who said? I mean, because I kind of agree with that philosophy, so I'm just kind of wondering.
Well, we have always too.
And you have
because
too,
that's not
so
been our
that's
mission.
why I'm wondering if we're bending out of that.
Yeah, the entire landscape has changed since about 2010. Everything's really different. I started here in 1998, and there was no Affordable Care Act. There were no exchange plans. There was no 138% of poverty Medicaid eligibility. There was no TAM, targeted adult Medicaid.
Richard, let me ask you, I don't mean to derail your thought, but I think maybe this question might bring some clarity to it. Because we talk a lot about 138% of poverty. Well, that's nice. I have no idea. Who is that, right? I mean, are we talking about the full-time employee at McDonald's who has a health care program, but they would fall into this, working class poor to where they're just really not getting the medical care and treatment that they're needed outside of a government safety net, even though they are on a private insurance program through their work because of their salary? I mean, when we talk about this demographic, who are we talking about? What does this demographic look like in real world terms, not necessarily, percentage figure terms?
If you work full-time, first of all, 100% of poverty is $14,290 a year.
Okay.
If you work full-time and you work 2,000 hours a year, that's about $7.50 an hour. That's not very much. If you look at 138% of poverty, I wish I'd printed off this other worksheet that we're working on now. We're trying to find out who is at that cutoff, and of course it varies based on family size. But you're still not even talking $10, $11 an hour for an hourly wage for someone who works full-time as an individual. So if you're making $15 an hour as a construction worker and you've got a wife and 2 kids at home, you're gonna fall in that level.
You're going to be close to that.
Right. So that's another thing that's been kind of difficult for us because our sliding fee scale has been based around 100% of federal poverty guidelines. So we really haven't looked at that gap. What we've had historically, and this is self-report again, so we're not entirely comfortable that this is 100% accurate, but about 93 to 95% of everybody that comes to us for treatment comes through the criminal justice system or the child welfare system, and they are, well, not that many, about 78%, the rest are juvenile justice and justice courts. 95% of everybody we see is at or below 100% of federal poverty when they come to us to start treatment. That's why getting them employed is so important, and we do a pretty good job with that.
And you do a good job of that, and that's why I raised that question, is because I'm trying to, I understand, and I like the philosophy of, that our stop is a safety, you know, a social safety net, right? But it really feels like, as you mentioned, maybe over the course of the last 10 years, with the adjustments in the law because of the Affordable Care Act, we're maybe seeing a shift of where that safety net actually falls.
Exactly, yeah. It's no longer in the federal substance abuse prevention and treatment block grant, almost 75% like it was 10 years ago. It's now about 60 plus or minus % on Medicaid. And then for those, again, on the 138% of poverty program, they will fall off of that
Right.
at some point once they're in treatment with us when we get them employed.
And
To
that's,
kind of go back and answer
okay.
your question, who would we not compete for in the private sector? We wouldn't compete for instance, county employees who are on a select health plan. We wouldn't go for Blue Cross or Aetna commercial insurance clients. We're just interested in those ones that we already have contact with, that we've started in treatment, and when we do our best to kind of push them back into the mainstream economy in terms of housing and employment and other community engagement, you know, commercial health insurance is one of those things that we hope that they will get. You know, one of the scenarios that we've put together to educate legislators is we have a guy who was a commercial truck driver, and because of a drug problem loses his commercial trucking license. Once we get him into treatment, by the time we get him, you know, halfway through treatment, we're able to get his commercial truck driver's license back. So he might be able to go to work for a company like Cisco. They probably have a commercial health insurance plan for their employees. Hopefully, he would get on that plan, and then at that point, we wouldn't be able to bill for that insurance because he's nearly done with treatment. We would probably try to transfer him to another provider at that point.
Okay, so I guess the cross between when the treatment, or when we would be billing for it and when a private company would be billing for it, is there a lack of service that's going on where the private sector is not picking it up, or else are they picking it up but they're doing it at a higher cost to the individual? Is that what it is? And so
Yeah.
we can do it for less, and that's where, if government's
Right.
involved, you know, we're doing it for less. There's some
Right.
subsidization that's going on with that, less than the private sector. That's why the private sector usually squawks and says, I can't compete against the government, because the government can always do it for less than,
Right.
than
We're
than
taking
what
the
they're
ones
doing.
that they really don't want.
So that, I mean,
Still.
that's important for me to know, is that if we have a gap in there in which the private sector is not picking them up, and there's individuals that are falling off from that, but how do we know that, I mean, how do you know that that's
You
the
know
case?
that. That's
We
a
don't.
great question.
Yeah, we don't. If they start with the private sector, we never see them unless they run out of insurance coverage or money, and then they want to dump them on us because we're subsidized. It works the other way, you know, from the top down, but not really from us from the bottom up very often.
And this
So-
38% is a new number, right? So we
Right.
don't know how the private sector is even going to treat this demographic, if they'll treat them differently and naturally dump more of them to us. Would we anticipate some of that or not?
I don't really think the problems that are going to be presented or the need for treatment is going to be very different at all. We've had some interesting discussions, for instance, with LDS Family Services about providing treatment for their kids, and some of their adults, they want to send folks over to us for screening. And it's like, great, we're happy to do that for you. And, you know, I asked, I said, this is what our clientele looks like. Is this, the clientele you're sending to us looks substantially different? And they said, no, they're almost exactly the same.
Richard, one question that I have is, we've been talking about the 138% of poverty level, but we were also talking about exchange plans and
Right.
being in network with those. My understanding is that there actually is no income threshold related to the exchange plans.
There's not an income threshold, but there is a subsidy based on income for the exchange
Exactly,
plans.
but if someone making 150 grand goes on, they would buy the exact same plan as someone making 25 grand. The difference is that a federal subsidy would help the person with the lower income pay for that premium.
Right.
But both of those people would be in the same network. And once you're in network with that plan, you could be seeing either of those individuals.
We could, but that's not our intention. What we want to
Sure.
do is for those that come to us already that are eligible for Medicaid and enrolled in Medicaid, when they fall off, we just want to be able to continue to their continuity of care with us until they're done with their treatment episode, and then build exchange plans. And this will help us with that $3 million budget hole that we're trying to make sure that we can backfill. So,
Well, I'm supportive of this, and I don't really view this as a changing philosophy, and quite frankly, I think that when we decide to enter into a activity that engages with the marketplace, like a convention center or like a health department in today's health insurance world, it's a bit of a fiction to say that we're not competing. We always are. So there might be things on the edges that we can decide we don't want to do, that we want to leave to the private sector, but there always is going to be some level of competition, and I'm comfortable with that.
well, if it makes you any more comfortable, we're not going to go out and market our services to commercial health insurers or employers or anybody else that we would kind of typically consider to be in the private marketplace. That's not what we do.
Yeah. Well, I mean, either way, I'd like to have more conversation on this
Okay.
with you. Yeah.
Do you want to talk offline, or what would you like to do?
Well, I think there's probably, I haven't formulated all the questions for it. You know, I hear kind of where we're going with it, but I think maybe, for me, maybe just a one-on-one, we can
Okay.
kind of work down through it a little bit better.
Okay, yeah, I'm happy to do that.
Except for Richard, I think we need to have an admin meeting with the three of us and you to discuss other changes.
Well,
So-
I think I'd like to sit down with the three of you and discuss other changes as well.
So let's try to get that on the calendar as soon as we can.
Okay. Anything else you'd like to ask about this?
No.
Okay, so right now, are we in limbo, or are we gonna move ahead, or
It sounds like,
Commissioner Lee has some additional questions? but-
right, so I think, meet with Commissioner Lee, hopefully, you think you could get together
yeah.
before Wednesday? So we could maybe push this to Wednesday, if the two of you could coordinate calendars.
Well, again, here's another question. This is a work session item. It really is not gonna result in a contract, or we could create a written policy for this.
Yeah, but
You would have to-
I was thinking the same thing, Nathan. I'm not sure that we ever vote on this. This was just kind of a discussion, and to a certain extent, some of this is already taking place.
Yeah,
Right,
it's
so-
it's an interesting one that way, because it's
I know,
not,
yeah.
I mean, it says policy, but I mean, I don't reconsider policy, and I guess it's more of a philosophy.
Right.
And philosophically, if you're falling within the set parameters of the public safety net for what's being defined as poor, right?
Right.
Then I think that we're probably, for me, you're on safe ground. As long as.
I mean, we already approved the contracts with the ACOs, right? Those were the official actions.
Well, and I'm asking you this because I don't want to get in trouble only on purpose. Do I want to get in trouble? So I don't want to inadvertently get in trouble you know, by pursuing this, when this has been something that we've all discussed a couple of times. And I think it's important that we all agree that whether we pursue this path or not. But again, we're looking at filling a budget, and this will help us do that to a certain extent.
Good.
Okay, I'll
Well-
follow up with you.
Ryan's right there, so we can.
There you go. Hey, thanks, Richard. All right, next up, we've got our last agenda item, number 12, to discuss process for adding approved positions to the staffing plan. All right. Looks like we get Ralph.
Good afternoon, Ralph Barnes, Human Resources. As we get into the 2020 year of budget, I want to make sure that we're all on the same page as far as the process of adding these approved roles to the staffing plan, how we want to handle that with the agenda, and if there's anything that you don't have that you do need. Of course, this stems from, variation in the estimates given by the department heads during the budget process and the estimate that HR has always, provided with the agenda items. As I did look into that more, I did find that at a high level, it really is just a variation in, two estimates. Essentially, department heads during the process of making the budget are trying to come up with an estimate of what they think it's going to cost. As we add the agenda item, the timing is different, and we're looking at all the costs of benefits at a maximum level because we want to make sure we're never short. We never want to make a decision on hiring someone, based upon the cost of benefits. And so it's oftentimes there's, it's not uncommon that there's an excess there in the cost of the benefits. In the most recent example, wages were off by about $1,300. Benefits was off by about $875. I do understand, the importance of these being exact as much as possible. We're trying to stay, within what has actually been approved. I guess at this point, I would just like to ask, questions of the commission of what you would like to see going forward, and if you see any issues or problems that we can help solve.
I think it's I think it's a communication. I talked with Patrick as well, specifically going back to this one issue that we were talking about, and he mentioned to me, he says, well, when he was putting his budget together, he had to ask your department, for the numbers. He doesn't just have the numbers himself. And so when he turns in a budget number, he's turning it in based off of an understanding of the numbers that he got from your department are the numbers. And so that throws him, a little sideways because he doesn't quite know how to handle that. But I also understand that they don't necessarily get hired in. You kind of do it on a worst case scenario, or not a worst case. Let's put it as you have built-in buffers in there for some flexibility, and so this is kind of a year-end discussion more on budgeting than it is on necessarily staffing plans as they come forward, throughout the year, because that should have already been in place through the budgeting process. But I think that just maybe on a communication, because I think he would have probably put the other number in if he would have known the other number in his budget. And I don't see it as being necessarily a problem with this one position, because by the time that even happens on a hire, we're going to be 4 or 5 or 6 pay periods down the road.
Right, that's exactly right. And we actually did the estimate on, I think, the 19th of last year of December. So we were assuming, the worst case, when I say worst case,
Yeah.
the soonest hire as possible. And then we also, of course, assume, family coverage and medical. We assume that they're going to enroll the full amount in the 401k. We make those assumptions because, again, we don't ever want to be short on benefits. And that's I think the safe way to go, because again, we never want to say, oh, we're not going to hire you because you need a family plan. We don't have the money for that. So that's really, I think, super important. But again, I don't see this being an issue much, going forward. I think it really is because it was the first one of the year and we just had some variations, and Patrick didn't make a mistake. I think our office did what we normally do, but I think being aware more of what has actually been, approved in the budget and making sure that we are in alignment, I think is going to be a solution for that. But again, with that being said, we're going to get into several more of these because we do have, I think, 15 or 20, jobs that have been approved, through the budget process. And so we'll see some more of these. And we just, again, I want to make sure we're giving you what you need to make your decisions. So if there's any questions or anything that you think you need, please, let me know.
So from my perspective, I'm glad that, is Deneen still in the room?
I'm here.
So I want Deneen's perspective on these. These are one items that I think it's always very helpful to have her review so that we, on the agenda before it goes on, to confirm that there's budget. I also view this is kind of a weird one, Ralph, because HR is obviously my portfolio assignment, but I view these more related to the underlying department. And so, if I see a staffing plan and it relates to the recorder's office, I'm going to be talking to Jeff about it and about his budget more than I am going to be talking to you about it. And if it relates to IT, then my expectation is that Bill's having that conversation, not me. Right? And so I think for me, staffing plan changes have the biggest budgetary impact of anything we vote on. And so I always just want to have Deneen sign off. And it's also important to me, given that timing discussion we just had, that we analyze it in the right way. So going back to a familiar example, if it's later in the year and we're making a hire or several hires, and the budgetary analysis is simply that there's enough in the budget then, but I don't think that's an adequate analysis. I think it needs to be, that's because they're going to be on payroll for November and December, but next year that's going to increase the budget by X amount of dollars. I just personally, that's certainly how I'm going to approach it when there's staffing plan changes with my portfolio assignments. I don't know how the other two feel about, making sure that Deneen reviews those for every staffing plan change. I guess we can kind of have an open dialogue
But
there.
I think that I hear what you're saying on there. There's a concern I have, and that is that if HR is putting it on the agenda, and that's how it happens, then the department is out of that loop. And unless, and I think by our policies anyway, it should go through a review anyway for budgetary matters through Deneen. And so if it does go through Deneen and she says, there's not enough budget, you don't have that budget in there, then that number would come back to that budgeted number. Then the department head would then be back in the loop, being that was the number that was submitted in the budget. So I agree that it does need to go through at least that if HR is going to be putting it on our agenda, then somebody, the department head or Deneen, and probably Deneen in this case, says here's the budget that's been allocated for that position, and that way it crosses and comes together instead of has that separation that we recently seen.
No, I think that makes sense, and I think that she should always look at these and make sure that that is in place. And I think that's happened normally, but
I think normally that's the way it's been done, but there has been times when
I
she
think it may
hasn't
be
seen it.
confusing because sometimes when the agenda request is created, the budget review is not marked as yes, it's marked as not applicable. So I think that probably would help. The other thing that I kind of have a question about is I feel like we have two different types of staffing plan requests. We have the items that the commission sort of already reviewed and gave approval to for specific inclusion in the budget. And there might be things that now come up after we've gone through the budget process. And I might suggest it's that type of position that we talk about it first in a work session type meeting before it's even on the agenda.
You're saying one that's not even budgeted? Are you saying that, or? Yeah, okay.
Right, when it's a new request that there was never a staffing plan change. It was never discussed as part of the 2020 budget process.
And that would be good, because then we could see your analysis on workload, if it's a workload case where we're, doing 2 instead of 1 because of workload scenario and so forth. I think that would be great for this type of a forum.
I do think that, oh, sorry, Tanner, go ahead.
Well, I like that thought too, Deneen, and I'm trying to understand exactly what you mean. I mean, I think I know what you mean, but that's one of the challenges, because sometimes we just answer the question, is there budget funds? And so I'm not sure I guess we kind of have to go back through the way items were requested in the 2020 budget process to make this determination that you're saying of whether they were a part of it or whether they're not? Or is there another way that we track that?
So I think HR has the information on which positions were approved during the budget, or at least the funding that was. So I mean, I think it'd be pretty clear to them whether it was already discussed as part of a vetting process, I would say, or if it's a totally new position. I guess that's just a question for the commission. Do you want all new staffing plan change request forms to just show up on the consent agenda with me making budgetary comments appropriate? Or if it's something that's never gone through a vetting process, do you want that to be on the work session first? Am I understanding the question correctly?
I'm not sure.
I like it going on work sessions if it hasn't before, but I'm also thinking, Deneen, that there's a few categories, right? There's one that was approved, but the total amount has just changed.
Right.
Right? In which case, I get Ralph's point. I mean, we approved at a different point in time, whatever, it's 2,000 more now at this point, right? And then the question there is, somehow we got to come up with funds, and maybe that department can just transfer funds or take it from another position, or we got to deal with that. But that underlying position may have already been specifically approved.
Right.
Then there's the ones that have all the funding, were specifically approved, and they're in it. For me, obviously, I'm not going to have much of a conversation. That I'm just fully supported on putting that on consent and signing it.
Right.
So, and then the third, like you're saying, is something totally new that also doesn't have funding, or they may have extra wages funding in their department for some reason, but the position has never been described. Personally, I would be fine. I would be supportive of that on the work session.
Okay, yeah, I think that makes sense. The only, I was just thinking of another scenario. We do have a couple of cases on the approved for 2020 where the department's been giving, like a lump sum for several positions. And so it's not necessarily clear about how much money is allocated for each role. So in those cases, and there's only a couple of them, but we would be submitting what we think is the estimate, but it may be coming out of a total for the budget for that department. So just be aware of that. Those are going to happen. But I agree, if it's something that hasn't been already vetted, it should come here first. And again, I think like you, I don't want to extend the process, too much, but I also think it needs to be vetted. I do have a concern about, the speed of hire. There's definitely a correlation. I've seen this a lot recently within the county with the ability of us to make a hiring decision as fast as possible to get the highest quality of candidate. But I also support 100% just making sure we have the funding available. So as long as we can try to keep this efficient and get through these processes as quickly as possible, I think that's important.
Also, I should probably comment that I really feel like I probably have to check the budget 2 times, only one of which the commission would be aware. The first time is when it's on the agenda, because that's the best guess of where the employee will be hired at. Theoretically, there could be an employee who was hired above what the estimate was at, which we've talked about, that there'd be some type of personnel action list that would be done offline. That wouldn't be part of the meeting.
Correct.
And this kind of goes to our process point earlier, even with community development, is, Ralph, to your speed of hire point, I would hope that department heads, if we can get those ones that are funded, are approved, just clearly state it that way in their agenda request, and Deneen signs off, then I think those can just slide right through, right? We don't want to confuse, we don't want to be difficult for things that have already been approved, but we do want to apply a higher level of scrutiny to the other types of staffing changes.
I think that makes sense, and I realize in the past, in 2019, if it was approved, it didn't always go on the agenda if it wasn't an actual, increase in budgeting. I do think in this year, it's important that we have complete, transparency and that there is multiple eyes looking at this to make sure that everything is as it is expected to be. So that's what we intend to do, and that's how we're gonna go forward in 2020.
Sounds good.
Any questions?
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, that, I believe, brings us to the end of our agenda. Any public comment? Seeing none, I'll entertain a final motion.
Motion to adjourn.
Wait, sorry, Nathan and Bill,
Yeah.
do you guys, I think we should make the motions
Oh,
related
correct.
to.
Oh, that's correct.
You're, good catch, Tanner.
Yeah.
So I'll entertain the motion to move these items forward.
So let's see, which number was that we were? 11?
Number 10,
Well, so I think it's
So is number 11 then, Richard, is that one that we're gonna take to a different forum? Or is it gonna go on the agenda? What's the? We take it to our authority board meeting? I mean, what's the,
I think that's probably the authority board.
so.
Yeah,
so
but
then
I
would-
just,
so
I
that-
just don't think there's any action associated with 11.
Right,
Right.
that's why we take it to the
That's why
authority
we
board
just
with it.
take it to the
So
authority
on the,
board.
for this reason, we'd probably just,
One of the things I'm
Strike
gonna
it.
ask. Sorry. One of the things I'm gonna ask the Division of Substance Abuse and Mental Health if we can do is to use this meeting for these kinds of questions as equivalent of an authority board meeting. So, I mean, we'll still have separate authority board meetings because we kind of have to by rule, but since we do so much of our business in county commission meetings for approval of contracts and ordinances and things like that, they've allowed us to have fewer than 4 a year because we have this other method where you, as a group of the 3 commissioners who are also the local authority board, make those decisions there.
this cannot be used as an approval. This is a work session and no approvals can be made in this meeting.
Okay, that's helpful.
so then, just for clarification, so we would be instructing Kelly not to put this number 11 on the agenda. Is that correct?
Correct. We will put that
Okay,
on an authority
so
board
that's-
meeting agenda.
So besides that, then the motion would be to place all of the items 1 through 12, except for number 10, on our next commission meeting.
11.
11.
Yeah, and 11, yeah.
Sorry, but 12 isn't going on.
And 12.
Right.
Well,
And
It's not
12,
an
that's
action
correct,
item
yeah,
either.
okay, 10, 11, and 12.
Right.
Okay. I have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second?
Perfect. I have a motion and a second to move work session items numbers 1 through 9 to our next regularly scheduled commission meeting. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
That will carry 3-0. Okay, and then now we'll entertain a final motion.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to adjourn. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye?
Aye.
Aye.
It'll carry 3-0.